So Joe Rogan got called out for telling a lie on his podcast. Now, as you guys know, over the past week, the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California, has essentially all been on fire. In fact, it looked like Mars. And on the day, here in California, where I was, where it stopped looking like Mars, there were ashes literally everywhere. On every single thing, there was ashes everywhere on the car. It was pretty disgusting and pretty crazy to see. So all the ashes had basically fallen down. But there's always these false narratives that are portrayed by the right, which is always to blame, quote, arsonists for these fires. And now not only were they doing that this time around, but they're trying to blame it on Antifa. So Joe Rogan is going to perpetuate this lie right here.
Enjoy going there. I actually love Portland. It's one of my favorite places to perform. Most of the people there are very nice. But there's a madness going on there. You want to talk about madness of crowds? That exemplifies that right now. And it's to me, they've arrested people for lighting forest fires up there. They've arrested left-wing people for lighting these forest fires. Air quote activists. And this is something that's also not widely being reported. That people have actually been arrested for lighting fires up there. This is I don't know what, if I would love to talk to the mayor and say, what is your strategy for ending this? Are you hoping this is just going to die down? Because these people want your head and they want blood, and they don't seem to be willing to settle for anything less.
So Joe Rogan got called out for this false claim. His false claim here really being dual here. But the main false claim is that he's claiming that there's basically a bunch of people who are being arrested on arson charges who are actually related to the Antifa movement, whatever that is. Especially since it's in Portland, this is kind of the narrative that's being portrayed to try to blame the left on this and try to blame Antifa. But FBI Portland says reports that extremists are setting wildfires in Oregon are untrue. Help us stop the spread of misinformation by only sharing information from trusted official sources. And apparently the local law enforcement also is saying that this is not true. So FBI Portland says that this is not true. There's no actual evidence of this. And if you look at the people who are being arrested for these arsons that are committed, it's pretty clear it does not seem to be the case that there are any ties to Antifa from these people. But more importantly than this, so first of all, this is sort of two-layered for me, because I remember the same bullshit that was being perpetuated, except it had nothing to do with the left. It had to do with trying to blame the massive fires in Australia on arsonists, right? These fires that are being started, they were blaming all of those massive wildfires on those little fires that were being started that mostly get put out. So these arsonists, they start up a fire and then it gets put out. First of all, allowing some of these fires, like the gender reveal one that did some real damage, allowing those to happen only happens in a climate that is as dry and as hot as it is right now. So climate change has led us to a position where it is allowed for the fertilization for these kinds of fires in the first place. But these kinds of fires in Oregon, they get put out and they are not responsible. They're not responsible for the greater fires that are going on. So somebody who is supposed to be all about, talking about climate change, or at least he was with his talk with Candace Owens. I don't know if he really cares about climate change or not. Maybe he's not trying to do that with climate change. I don't know why he would even repeat such a lie on his podcast. It's really sort of bizarre to me. But there's no evidence that the reason for these fires as a whole, where it looks like Mars, there's no evidence that is because of some little arsonists that are being arrested. That's total bullshit. And it's an attempt to skirt away attention from climate change and instead pin it on other shit like these little arsonists. But the idea that these are coming from Antifa people is insane. Most of these arsonists are just lunatics. They're just insane. They're just insane. But Joe Rogan he issued an apology. Now, there's also an interesting part about this apology, but what he says in his apology is He says, I fucked up on the podcast with Douglas Murray and said that people got arrested lighting fires in Portland. That turns out to not be true. I was very irresponsible not looking into it before I repeated it. I read one story about a guy getting arrested for lighting fires. Turned out to be true, but the other shit I read about people getting arrested for lighting fires in Portland was not true. I repeated it without looking into it, and it was a really fucking stupid mistake that won't happen again. I'm sorry. So, what's interesting also, if you look up these stories about arsonists, it's always these like really kind of sketch right-wing sites that are, quote, reporting these stories. And also, I think that it's interesting because I think a lot of people were saying that Joe Rogan was saying a lot of right-wing stuff on his podcast with Douglas Murray. And it kind of goes to a point of how Joe Rogan sort of seems to jump towards certain things. He seems to say more right-wing things with certain right-wing guests. Sometimes he'll have on like someone like a Dan Crenshaw, but he'll say like, he'll debate him on things and actually like take up the advocacy of left-wing positions. But in some cases, he'll just start like going with the flow for some reason and just like becoming a total hack. It's really weird. But there's also a question of whether or not he issued this apology because of his deal with Spotify. I think this is a very legitimate question because I saw a lot of people were trying to get him deplatformed from Spotify. They're trying to point out his deal with Spotify. They're trying to bring attention to Spotify. And it's a genuine, legitimate question to wonder whether or not Joe Rogan actually sort of issued this apology because he signed with Spotify, and whether maybe Spotify could have put pressure on him, maybe sent him a message or something like that. Or maybe he already sort of imagined that, like, he's like, oh, well, I don't want to get in trouble with Spotify, so I'll issue this apology. Because otherwise, he'll have some accountability expected, but he had so much freedom that there really isn't much leverage to get him to apologize for a lie like this. So I think it's genuinely a question whether or not he apologized because of the Spotify deal. And I don't know what the update is from the situation with, remember those podcasts that were apparently not included on the Spotify page? I don't know if there's been an update on that or anything like that, but it'll definitely be very interesting to see if that Spotify deal and the money that he was given has influenced his show, influenced him, influenced his moves, what he says, all of that kind of stuff, because then that kind of means that he's kind of a sellout. So, I'm glad that he apologized. I'm definitely glad that he apologized, but I'm not sure if he would have done so if he wasn't signed with Spotify. Now, that's not a guarantee of anything that I'm saying that he wouldn't have done it had he not been with Spotify, but it's a little bit hard for me to imagine that he would have done this. But definitely let me know your thoughts on all this stuff down below. A lot of stuff going on.